Okay, we've started.
Welcome, everybody. We are starting a perinatal mental health initiative webinar series. We're hoping to do a series of 4 or 5 webinars over beginning this fall and going through next June. We will be promoting and letting you all know about the upcoming webinars through email, and so you're welcome to get on the Perinatal Support Washington newsletter list, or they'll also be going out through DCYF's email list as well. Today we're going to be focusing on perinatal mental health for dads. So this work that's funding this webinar series is a collaboration between Perinatal Support Washington and the Department of Children, Youth, and Family, specifically the Strengthening Families Washington team. The primary aim of this program is child abuse prevention, but it has a community-based part to it, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But it's federal funding, and the goal is to support community-based efforts to develop and operate, expand, and enhance initiatives, programs, and activities to prevent child abuse and neglect, with an emphasis on strengthening families. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how we're doing that. So the overall program, I'm just going to give you kind of a brief overview. It's a project that we started in June 2018, so we are now in our 2nd year of this program, and the idea was to provide perinatal mental health capacity building opportunities for communities across the state. So we did this in a couple of different ways. We thought about providing training to as many providers as we could across the state. And then we also thought about how we could work really more in a more focused way with communities that were really ready to start implementing perinatal mental health initiatives in their communities. And so this looked like we did 2 pretty big trainings. We did one in King County in 2019, and we did another in Spokane. And those were both 2-day trainings. And then last year we did quarterly webinars, very similar to the webinar series that we're doing again this year, and we cover topics like perinatal mental health as a public health concern. Another webinar was on perinatal mental health support groups, how and why they work and whether they're effective for new parents. We also looked at population-based statistics and prevalence of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So we looked at that for communities that are in poverty, communities that experience high amounts of poverty. We looked at a couple of specific communities. And those trainings were available to any provider across the state. Then we also provided the opportunity for communities that were ready to really think about this work to participate in 2-year funding that involved creating what we called perinatal mental health task forces. And those were sort of multi-sector groups of folks in each county that would come together and really talk about what was happening in their community around perinatal mental health. So that was like the community aspect of it, that within, a county, there's many different communities that have different needs around perinatal mental health. And so this was an opportunity for, folks from the Native and Indigenous communities to say, this is what my community needs in response to perinatal mental health, or the Latinx community, for instance, or, thinking about dad support. And then those community task forces set some goals around working towards building capacity. The other thing that those 7 communities did was they had 1-day perinatal mental health trainings. They also trained support group facilitators and then started support groups in all of those communities. And then the last thing that they did was they created resource and referral guides that are for families or providers to help them find where the resources are in their communities so that it increases access to care. So the overall goal was increased community capacity. So those were things like having support groups, having trained providers, having knowledgeable people in their communities, even if they weren't providers that were treating perinatal mental health, and then also to create those easy pathways for families. So basically to decrease barriers. And that looked like that resource and referral guide. It also looked like the collaboration and networking that happens between all of the different providers that attended either the task force meetings or the one-day trainings, who were building, you know, closer connections, and then therefore creating, you know, referral pathways that were more seamless, and be able to create warm handouts. That last sort of bottom green triangle, the intensive high quality supports, we wanted to put that into this slide because a lot of the work that we're doing in this program is really a foundation. And we know that all communities across Washington state really need high quality perinatal mental health supports. And this pilot project is hoping to be able to expand and continue to do some of that work, but we're starting with sort of a foundation level of training and education around what is perinatal mental health. And we want to acknowledge that we know that communities need that intensive high quality supports, and that even though we're not providing it in this, we hope to work towards that. So again, I covered this most in that last slide. Our goals are to increase capacity within communities to recognize, support, and refer families to appropriate supports for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders among individual and organizations that interact with families. So one of the unique parts of this was we did not limit any of the participation in the program. So for instance, the task forces or the one-day trainings to just mental health providers or even healthcare providers. We really wanted folks from a wide range of, you know, programs and services that interact with families to attend. So like even folks from childcare, even folks from you know, churches or temples or synagogues or mosques to attend, and then to establish easy pathways for families if more people are aware of perinatal mental health needs in the families that they're serving. So just a little bit about Perinatal Support Washington. Our mission is shining the light on perinatal mental health to strengthen all families and communities. And we do this by raising awareness through webinars like this, educating professionals also through webinars like this, supporting families. So we do that in our support groups and on our toll-free warm line. And then in bringing everyone together and making connections. A few of our services. So I talked a little bit about our support groups. Perinatal Support Washington really loves to partner with local organizations to help them start support groups. So we provide education, training, technical assistance, and ongoing clinical consultation. We have a statewide warm line. It's our parent support line, and it's staffed by parents who have recovered from mood and anxiety disorders or therapists. We have moms and dads on the line, and we also have a Spanish speaker, a staff person who answers the line for any Spanish-speaking callers. We provide healthcare provider referrals. So we have a statewide provider list of mental health specialists that really specialize in perinatal mental health. So we have therapists, med management, and then we also have doulas, anyone who's working somatically, so like licensed massage therapists or movement therapists, all of whom have trained specifically around working with new families around perinatal mental health. We provide brochures currently in English, and we will be providing Spanish brochures in the new year, so in January. And then we provide trainings in services and conferences. We really, really love to consult with programs across the state that are serving new parents, and we provide consultation on anything from starting perinatal mental health screening, consultation on starting a new support group, consultation on starting new mental health services. So please feel free to reach out. And then check our website out. We have a really great, lots of information on different aspects of perinatal mental health. We have downloads for providers and parents, things like how to create a postpartum wellness plan. We have resource and referral docs specifically for dads, for families of color. And then we have 7 county-based resource and referral guides. And you can find those all on our website. And then lastly, join our newsletter. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Nicholas Kosabek. He is a advocate for infants and kiddos and for dads. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about himself, and we'll jump into the webinar. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Mia, and thank you for having me. I'm honored to be presenting this topic as it has become a very strong passion of mine. Before we get started, I'd like to invite the listeners to grab a pen and paper. I'll be posing some rhetorical questions throughout the presentation, and I have a little activity. And if you'd like, I would encourage you to write down some of your thoughts that pop up into your head, just as a way to remember them. By capturing those first thoughts, they tend to emerge before any filter kicks in to tell you that you're thinking of the wrong answer. So it's kind of a truth filter. These will obviously be kept private unless you choose to share them. So I'll give a little background about myself. Go ahead and get that pen and paper if you would like. So my background is about 20 years in pediatrics in different roles and different settings. I worked for 10 years as a home visitor, healthy step specialist, which is child development and primary care. For a couple of those years as a healthy step specialist, I visited families that had preemies after they were discharged from the NICU and went back home. And I'm currently endorsed as an infant family specialist with the Washington Association for Infant Mental Health. I developed the DAB projects, which are some programs that are in a series. One is 6 weeks where dads come with their babies, and it's just a way for dads to be together, to play with their babies, to learn about child development. And we ask that moms not attend because we would like to give her the opportunity to have some alone time or some focusing on self-care, whatever it is that she wants to do for those couple of hours. And then subsequently, there were a lot of dads that really liked coming together, and so I developed a dads and toddlers. And the other reason that that's important is that toddlers are very unique in their behavior, in their capacities, in their development, and a lot of parents don't understand what's going on. So this was an opportunity to have a real world experiential example to show dads a toddler's behaviors and how to manage them, and to basically practice with the support of other dads and with me present. Currently, I teach the conscious fathering at Swedish Hospitals, which is the prenatal class for dads that's coordinated by Parent Trust for Washington Children. And currently, I'm also studying occupational therapy. So just a couple other quick notes. I'm not a clinician, I am not licensed, and my background is mostly rooted in the principles of infant mental health. So here's the first activity for the pen and paper. For each of these 4 questions, I'll ask you to write down what's the first thing that just pops into your head, and try not to filter. And I'll be timing to give 30 seconds for each question. So the first question is, what assumptions do you have about expectant fathers? So ask yourself, when I think of fathers during the prenatal period, I think, fill in the blank. You have about 15 seconds left. So hopefully you thought of a couple of things and wrote them down. So the next question, number 2, is what assumptions do you have about fathers during labor and delivery? So when I think of fathers at the hospital during labor and delivery, I think, go ahead and fill in that blank, and we'll give you 30 seconds. "15 seconds. Okay, and question number 3, what assumptions do you have about new fathers? So after the baby is born. Ask yourself, when I think of a new father with his baby, I think, go ahead and fill in that answer, and we'll give another 30 seconds. About 15 seconds left. And then finally, question number 4, what assumptions do you have about a new father with his infant and mom is not present? So when I see a new father by himself with his baby, I think blank. And another 30 seconds. And 15 seconds left. Okay, so hopefully you were able to think of some things. And I just want to reiterate that these questions are meant to provide some self-reflection and introspection to what you may be thinking or feeling without realizing it about fathers and their new role. It may be eye-opening, illuminating, clarifying, validating, or reassuring. So the whole purpose of me doing this activity and these next couple slides is to try to paint the picture of what leads up to this transition to fatherhood and what it's like for the fathers and how all of those could be contributing factors to perinatal mood and anxiety disorders for fathers. So in this video, which is about a minute long, and this is from YouTube, it's a commercial for Dove Men Care, but it really captures the emotions and the expressions and just the feelings that a lot of fathers have when they find out that their partner's pregnant. So even though the sound's not really great, I encourage you to really watch the expression and to see the impact that this information has for these fathers. So I think it's important to acknowledge and realize the factors that are found in this transition to fatherhood, because they could possibly be symptoms of the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and/or they can exacerbate any struggles an expectant or new father may be experiencing. Because of that, this presentation may seem like I've gone off on tangents. Like I mentioned before, I'm trying to present what I think are some precursors to contributing factors to possible perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So I mentioned that I teach the conscious fathering class, which is a prenatal for dads. And I usually ask them this question at the beginning during the introduction, so I have a better idea of what they're dealing with when they're coming in, what's on their mind, so that I can really focus and try to get those answered. So it's really interesting that I've noticed this pattern. And so here's some of the top answers that I get pretty much every single week. So the question that I ask them is, what's your biggest worry, or what burning question keeps coming up for you? So probably the most common response I get is, I don't even know what to ask. So just everything, just tell me everything. I'm sure I'll have some questions at some point. So they don't even have a context from which to even pose questions. Another very, very common one is, I want to know how to best support my wife, mostly after we go home. A third one, which also is fairly common, is there are a lot of dads that say, I'm afraid of hurting my baby. How do I not hurt my baby? Just tell me, how do I not hurt my baby? And then a fourth one is, I want to be there for my wife and baby, but I have to go back to work. I have a stressful job. I know there's going to be sleep deprivation. So how do I balance between work and home life and my wife and baby's needs? So there's really this kind of struggle to wanting to care for their partner, their baby, but also the responsibilities of supporting their family or having an income. And for a lot of dads, this is worrying, especially if there have been other friends or family that have shared their experience and sort of forecast that this new father is going to have the same experience. So imagine a coworker who says, oh, yeah, wait till you get all the sleepless nights and you don't get any sleep and baby's going to be up screaming all the time. And well, that may have been true for that father, but it may not be true for this new father. So in looking over these answers, do you notice anything that's consistent in all of the answers? So where's dad in all of this? Where does he fit into this whole scenario? Or even just the plan? Who's taking care of his needs? Or does he even have any? So I just want to reiterate that new dads don't know what they don't know. And this ties back to that first answer of just tell me everything because I don't even know what to ask. So a lot of dads will say, just what do I do? Just tell me what to do. And I had one dad tell me the most common phrase that new parents hear is, what you need to do is, and then just fill in the blank. Also, everybody's always talking about swaddling. I thought we were supposed to do it. So this is something else that I've noticed as a pattern, is that dads will hear something over and over and over, and they assume that that means that that's what you do, or that's what's important, when it really depends on the context and what's going on with the baby, with the situation, with the context of that moment. So helping them to understand that. So because of that, I think that dads kind of take statistics whenever it's about topics or conversations or products, equipment, devices. Again, if they keep hearing it over and over, they kind of assume that, oh, well, this level of importance keeps raising the more that they hear about it. So what I think is most important is the emphasis should be on the father-baby relationship. So making that connection, fostering that connection, supporting and encouraging that time together. So dad and baby have their own dyad that connection. But also supporting their critical thinking, problem solving, and community resources. So if they do need to reach out with a question or help, it's really important that they know where to go. And I think Perinatal Support of Washington is one of the best resources to give, just because it's such great information and it's such a great safety net. And in all of my classes, I always talk about Perinatal Support of Washington as a resource and explain to them that, yes, they even have dads that staff the warm line. So if they want to talk to a guy, that they get to do that. And I've actually had dads contact me even weeks after the class asking for, what was that resource again? I think I want to talk to someone. So it's really important that we have this resource in our community, but also that families know about it. And then lastly, I found working with dads that it's really helpful if you organize and present the information to them in more of a checklist or bullet points kind of organization, and also by the tasks, because they seem to understand doing tasks. So like the first question, what do I do? Just tell me what to do. So if you can try to phrase things in a way that are kind of task related, but just short, sweet, to the point, usually they do much better with that. And yet with all of that going on, dads are still excited, nervous, thrilled, scared, committed, dedicated, challenged, motivated, and they really want to do their absolute best, even when they did not have a good father role model. So I think this is one of those myths that we tend to perpetuate in our culture, that, oh, well, he didn't have a father, so he doesn't know what to do. Or his father wasn't a good father, so we need to watch him. And I have found that that's just not the case. It runs the whole spectrum. So just because someone didn't have a dad, I've met quite a few men who actually were raised by single moms, and if they were the oldest of their siblings, they ended up being the other parent and had to change diapers and feed the baby with a bottle and make dinner for the siblings and potty train their brother. And so there's still a lot of dads, even though they may not have had a dad in their life, that they still know how to father. They still know how to care for an infant, for a baby. So again, I go back to that father-baby relationship and how important that is. And if we can just focus on that, foster that, and really encourage that. And if you think back to the video that we just watched, how excited they were that I'm going to be a dad. So it is a new and impending relationship between the father and the baby. And I heard this quote by Seth Meyers during an interview when he was talking with Terry Gross from Fresh Air. And I thought this really captured it really, really well. So what he says about this new relationship that's coming up and becoming a father is, quote, "The weirdest thing about being a father is how, because I think, mothers, like, their body for 9 months tells them it's coming. And then you aren't a dad, and then you just are, like the very next day," unquote. And I think that's a really important and poignant thing to consider, that, yeah, moms have a whole different experience to pregnancy and prenatal than dads do. And even though dads are there and part of it, they're not experiencing it in the same way that mom is. So he had this other quote that I thought was hilarious. And he says, this is a true story, I was filling out paperwork after our baby was born, and it said mother's name, and I wrote my wife's name. And it said father's name, and I wrote my wife's father's name. And then it said father's phone number. And I thought, who knows their father-in-law's phone number? And then I realized, oh, I'm the father. So this was another quote that I found. It was actually a Facebook post from Humans of New York. And I think it also really captured how being a dad is really meaningful and it's really important. And I think we tend to overlook that or minimize it or even dismiss it. So this is a father from Germany in Berlin, and he says, "My wife gave our son while she's at the doctor appointment, so I have the chance to watch him for a little bit. I'm going to bring him to lunch at the office and introduce him to my colleagues for the first time. I'm sure some of them won't care, but I'm excited about it. It's like my two worlds are coming together. Being a father is a huge part of who I am right now. And my colleagues are the people I spend the most time with. I'm excited for them to see why I'm so happy to go home every day." Now, despite dads having these really amazing feelings and thoughts and dreams, still, they're very often ignored, dismissed, discouraged, deflected, disengaged, denied, minimized, and excluded. So I invite you to consider, have you thought about all the ways that we disrupt that father-baby relationship, that dyad? So consider dad's experiences along the perinatal timeline, which I'll go through in just a moment. But during the prenatal period, during the labor and delivery period, during couplet care before they're discharged, and then after they go home. So if it's helpful to you, write down examples of dads being excluded or how you can include dads more. And if you wanted to share those and send them in some way, I would enjoy hearing them. So during the prenatal period, this can include appointments with the OB or the midwife, ultrasound appointments, childbirth, breastfeeding, newborn care classes, hospital orientation, doula services, maternal child clinic. So does dad have a vested interest in any of these situations? And how many times do you hear, oh, it's okay, you don't have to go. Oh, you don't need to be there. Well, maybe we should rethink that, and maybe he should be there. And even if services are not directly for dad, can he still participate? Can he still contribute in some way? So when he is at these appointments or in these classes, can he be included in the conversation? Can you help to foster the relationship with his partner? So if you think back to the 4 most common responses I get to their biggest worry, the second one was they want to support their partner. So why would we not include them through these changes that the mom is going through and help to support dad to support mom and educate them about how to do it? And as you're doing this, can you also find meaning and usefulness for his role as a new father? Do you recognize the need for his participation? Do you realize he'll probably be the best and most available resource for mom? And if he makes statements to the contrary, can you guide him to a new perspective? So there are some men that buy into that stereotype that I don't need to go to the ultrasound appointment, or it's just the doctor checkup, I don't need to be there. But that can also, if you can encourage him, find a way to get him to participate and to contribute, then maybe he won't have that sudden jarring change of one day I'm not a dad, the next day I am, that he can also kind of have a transition time for these big changes that are coming up for him. So I'm going to give an example of how dads are inadvertently left out. So in some ways, when we see things like this example, it sends the message that being the father of the child's not important, at least not important enough to mention and invite to a childbirth class. So in our efforts to be all-inclusive or politically correct, or even both, we continue to diminish and subjugate the importance of the father-baby relationship, or that father-infant dyad. And at the same time, we perpetuate overgeneralizations that dads are not present, dads are not interested, dads are absent, especially African-American dads, which is a myth, and that dads need to do more, dads need to show up, etc. So why won't we invite them specifically? Why can't we include them? Why won't we identify them by their role? It's as if there's a taboo to talk about dads or fathers when any perinatal topic is being discussed. And if you were a new father, expectant father, how do you think you might react to this kind of environment when on the registration it says, with all registrations, a birth partner can attend at no additional charge and the partner's information is entered when mom registers? Well, yes, partner can apply to dad as well, but what about to the baby? What is dad's relationship to the baby? I think that's what gets missed. So in the labor and delivery period, what are dad's hopes, dreams, and fantasies? Don't they have them too? Oftentimes we talk about the fantasies that pregnant moms have about the delivery and about the baby, but does anyone ever consider the dads? And also realize that they're going into the unknown, and there's this complete lack of control, and especially if they're used to managing their life and their choices and decisions, and now they're faced with absolutely no control and don't really know what's going to happen. Also consider that they're awake during the hours of labor that mom is too, typically. So they're also sleep deprived, they're also stressed, they're fearful. It's an emotional roller coaster for them too. Has anyone asked dad how he's doing with all of this? Now, he's trying to be there to be supportive of her, but he's also watching her in distress, or if there's complications that come up or emergencies that are unexpected. He's experiencing all of this as well. But what are we doing to acknowledge that or to check in with him? So consider an unexpected turn of events like an emergency C-section. Now 2 people he loves are in jeopardy of losing their lives, at least from his perspective, because it's the unknown, which all of this could lead to traumatic experience, PTSD, which then that can also contribute towards and leading to the perinatal or paternal perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, even months after the birth. So speaking of trauma, I had a dad just last week in a prenatal class for dads that shared he felt traumatized just by watching a birthing video in the birthing class. He didn't know what to expect, and it was a shock to him. He was very conflicted by the experience and his reaction, so he wanted to know, what can I do so I don't feel so traumatized, because I'm afraid I might faint or something and I don't want to. At the same time, he knew he had to be there for his wife. He wanted to be present for the birth of their baby, but he also didn't want to be a burden or distraction and create another crisis either. So what do you think about this particular dad? Any thoughts? Any concerns? What would you do if an expectant dad shared that with you? What would be your response? So I invite you to think about that, consider it. So during the couplet care, after mom and baby are settling into a room, being together. Now, there's a lot of references to maternal child health, maternal child hospitals, especially in other English-speaking countries. And again, where's dad in this? The emergency C-section example that I want to give was a story a dad told me about. He was up with his wife who was laboring for, it was either 28 or 32 hours. It was definitely more than 24 hours straight, like just really bad. And then baby's heart rate was dropping. I think the cord was wrapped around the neck. It came to that point that an emergency C-section was necessary. And so they got everything together, whisked mom to surgery, did the C-section, dad was there, went through it all. And by the end of it, he was just spent. He didn't even have anything to eat for 2 or 3 days. As he's leaning against the wall, exasperated after all of this, just completely and totally drained, he said the only person that said anything to him during that whole entire period was the anesthesiologist as he walked out of the OR, slapped him on the side of the arm and said, "You okay, bud?" as he kept on walking. Nobody else checked in with him to see how he was doing or if he was okay. So I also want to show you another example of a booklet that the hospital gives out for new mothers. But before I do that, I just want to pose some more rhetorical questions. So do you promote the father-infant relationship, and how do you do that? And even if dad doesn't receive direct services, can you make him feel welcome and important? Can you find what's meaningful and important in his role as a father? Can you include him in the conversation? Can he participate? Is it not his child too? And again, do you realize he's probably the best, most available resource for mom? So as much as we're increasing the importance of maternal mental health, which I think is very important, why don't we educate fathers about that and use them as that resource to help mom with their mental health? I also want to give another example of how we inadvertently kind of leave dads out of it. I was presenting at a conference last year in Rome and was presenting on how fathers are left out. And I ended up the next day having lunch with a couple of nurses that were from Sweden. And they told me they enjoyed the presentation. And I said, well, was there one thing that really stuck out for you, or what was your one important takeaway? And they worked at a maternal child hospital. And they said, you know, the fathers are often there with mom while she's recuperating. And I guess they stay there like 3 to 5 days, which is different than here in the United States. And they said, we never thought of asking him about his baby or how he's doing. Like it just never even occurred to them. And they realized that they could start doing that could be really helpful. And recognizing that the father's going to have a relationship with the baby as well as a relationship with mom. And so it's in their best interest to really foster that as well. So this is a booklet that's handed out at a hospital for new moms. It's called the New Mom's Handbook, and it's really beautiful. It's a glossy cover, thick cardstock. But is there something that you notice about the cover of the book? Now I'm going to move on to the table of contents. So you probably have figured out that there's no pictures of dads. So, well, let's look in the table of contents to see if surely there's a section for dads. I assume that you probably can't read this, so let me just say that there's nothing listed or mentioned about fathers or dads or anything like that. It's all geared and spoken directly to mom. However, if you go to page 21 out of 36 pages, this is the amount of information that dads get in this New Mom Handbook. So think about all the information that moms are expected to learn, to be educated, to be able to do right after having a baby, and we expect her to remember all of this and give her that burden. And yet dads, they get this one little margin. So how can we switch that so that we include dads not only to foster that father-baby relationship, but also to support his partner, to give him information, to have him help to remember things that maybe mom doesn't. So their competence and confidence in being a father is really of utmost importance. And I recently was reading a study that mentioned lower feelings of competence usually is a lower amount of self-efficacy. And with a lower self-efficacy, there's a higher risk for depression and other mental health issues. So whatever your role is during this time period, during perinatal, these questions are not meant to suggest or coerce you into adding to your responsibilities, unless it's your responsibility. So raising these questions are meant to bring awareness of the father's experiences and how they accumulate, intensify, and contribute towards possible perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And hopefully with this new awareness and possibly new knowledge, are you in a position that you might be able to enact change, make suggestions, rewrite or write new policies, change the culture of the environment? What can you do to make this better, even if it's something small? So when do dads get and acquire the skills of competence and confidence? How do they get reinforced? Are they starting at a deficit from the beginning, even when everything goes well or goes right? And you might think, oh, well, there's the prenatal class for dads. Yeah, that's really important and it's great, but it's 3 hours and it's basically just infant care. It's not all the other stuff and all of the possibilities, and there's just so much that could be covered. So I think it's important to focus on this question: are they starting at a deficit from the beginning, even if everything's going well? And if the father's considered to be in a minority group, especially African American, Latino, gay, trans, non-binary, then this deficit increases because there's a lack of support, there's a lack of resources. There's most likely explicit discrimination or implicit bias. So what if it was a traumatic labor and or delivery? Was it unexpected? Was it precarious? Was it an emergency? Did anyone check with dad to see how he was doing? Which goes back to the title of this presentation, Hey Dad, how are you doing? Has he been awake during the entire labor length of time? Might he be sleep deprived? When was the last time he had anything substantial to eat? Who's looking out for him? What impact does the father experience if the child is born with a medical condition, syndrome, or disability? So hopefully you'll see that there's a lot that's going on even before and during the baby coming into this world, that this father potentially is having to manage and to deal with. So how would you feel if you were this dad? And have you ever asked, hey dad, how are you doing? And if you have, when or why or what happened? So just want you to think about that for a moment. So I wanted to point out some terminology, representation, and exclusion. So when you're talking with dads, make sure you say, how are you doing instead of how are you feeling? This is an overgeneralization, but it tends to be fairly true that a lot of men don't like to talk about their feelings, or they're not sure how to do that, especially for this experience that's completely new to them. So if you ask them how they're doing, it implies more of a task-oriented or action-oriented situation. So it'll be more likely that they're able to answer that. Now there's this term father involvement, which is used a lot in the literature, in research, and then subsequently in parenting information and programs. And I would really like to see it changed to that we use the term fathering or parenting instead, because I believe this term implies a temporary or incidental engagement, and it presents an expectation that contributions or participation in that father-child dyad only needs to meet minimal efforts. So if we could just stop using that term and just call it fathering or parenting. And also, when we say mother's partner, that's usually to include same-sex couples. But what I'm about to describe is meant to exclude those. So it's more of the heteronormative male-female couple. So when we say mother's partner, we're implying that it's the mother and another adult relationship, that it's about the two of them. But when we say father or the dad, it's implying the father-child relationship. So we often focus on mother-child, mother-baby dyad, maternal-child. But when do we say father-child dyad or father-baby? So I'd like to encourage us to consider that too. So you can say, this class may include mother, father, and or a partner. So it would be easy just to add that, but to make sure that we include fathers. And then for research and clinical terms, do they promote the father-baby relationship, or do they sound dry, impersonal, and clinical? So these questions, I think, are really great to consider about dads as we're moving towards talking about the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So consider, has his mood changed lately? Has he become more withdrawn? Does he seem more irritable than usual? Do you know if he's sleeping well? Is he drinking more alcohol than he used to? Does he ever talk about harming himself or even suicide? If you know the birth was traumatic, have you noticed any of the following in the father? He seems jumpy or on edge. He mentions poor sleep and or nightmares. He's distant or shows no emotions, or much less than he did before. Has he said that he no longer has feelings for his wife or child? He speaks about flashback memories that relate to that traumatic event and appears to be distressed by that. Has he suddenly stopped talking about that event? So I had an example of this actually when I was doing one of the Dad Project series for dads and babies, and I had this one dad who one day he stayed after everybody had left, and we were in the room alone, just he and I and the baby. And he came up, he said, "I want to ask you a question." I said, "Okay." And he said, "So is it normal to not have feelings about your baby after they're born?" And I said, "Well, we know that the first couple weeks for women is what we call baby blues, and it's not uncommon for them to be overly emotional or have kind of strange feelings. But after that 2-week period, if it continues, then the concern for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is much, much higher, and we would strongly encourage them to have an evaluation." And I said, and I would assume that it's probably true for dads as well, that, you know, if these feelings happen longer than 2 weeks, then he really should go talk with a qualified professional to get this evaluation. And he said, "Oh, no, it was less than 2 weeks. It was just the first 2 weeks." But it really made me stop and think, is that really what happened? Or did he just not want to say anymore and end the conversation? So I'm just putting that out there, that I think this happens more often than we realize. But we don't realize it because we're not asking, and we're not providing the context for that to come out. So here are some other risk factors for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders for dads. So it could be a lack of good sleep, changes in hormones, personal history of depression or other mental health issues, especially anxiety. Poor relationship with the spouse, poor relationship with one or both parents, relationship stress, just in general, excessive stress about becoming a parent or a father, those expectations of themselves or expectations from others. Is it a non-standard family, such as not being married or being a stepfather? Are they exhibiting poor social functioning? A lack of support from others, elimination of social connections after baby arrives. And that's, I think, a really particularly important point to focus on too, is that usually during the prenatal period, you know, before the baby's born, dads tend to drop away from their social connections, and then after the baby's born, it's virtually non-existent. And yet we know that social connection and social support is one of the best protective factors for mental health issues. So how are we helping to promote dads fostering their social connections? Continuing with the list, there could also be economic problems or limited resources, a sense of being excluded from the connection between the mother and baby. How many times have you heard people say, well, mom's breastfeeding, so dad, no, you have nothing to do with this, just go away. And yet there's been research to show that dads contributing and participating in breastfeeding with their partner increases initiation and duration rates. So we need to rethink that as well. And then it's also really important to keep in mind that if mom has a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, up to 50% of dads could also have that perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So we know that perinatal mood and anxiety disorders may look different with dads than it does with moms. Now, here's a list of some classic symptoms of depression. So depressed or sad mood, loss of interest or pleasure, significant weight loss or gain, trouble sleeping or oversleeping, restless feelings and inability to sit still or slow down, fatigue, loss of energy or tired all the time, worthless or guilty feelings, impaired concentration and difficulty making decisions, recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. So here are some possible symptoms specific to men. So I mentioned some of these before, like increased anger and conflict with others, increased use of alcohol or other drugs, frustration or irritability, violent behavior, losing weight without trying, isolation from family and friends, being easily stressed, impulsiveness and taking risks like reckless driving and extramarital sex, feeling discouraged, increases in complaints about physical problems, ongoing physical symptoms like headaches, digestion problems, or pain, problems with concentration and motivation, loss of interest in work, hobbies, or sex, working constantly, frustration or irritability, misuse of prescription medication, increased concerns about productivity and functioning at school or work, fatigue, experiencing conflict between how you think you should be as a man and how you actually are. And that's particularly important with the conversations that are happening currently around toxic masculinity and what is healthy masculinity. And then lastly, thoughts of suicide. So this is some of the statistics on the prevalence. So there was one study that has identified about 10% of fathers have the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders during the perinatal period. Now, even though it was a small sample, they had determined that during the 3 to 6 month period following the baby's birth, it was as high as 25.6% of dads having depression. If you think about it, that's 1 in 4. So when I have a class of 10 dads in the prenatal, I'm looking around thinking, okay, which 2.5 men are going to be the ones that end up with depression during the 3 to 6 month? That there's that possibility. 24 to 40% of dads with PMAD correlated with moms being positive for PMAD. And they found that 30 to 100% had anxiety and panic disorder and acute adjustment disorder. 4 to 16%, had prenatal anxiety, and 2 to 18% had postnatal anxiety. So they also identified that depression in men is underdiagnosed and underreported. And I tend to agree with that, especially if you think back to all the ways that we overlook or minimize the importance of dads or their contributions or their participation. So if we're ignoring dads through the whole entire perinatal period, it would stand to reason that we're not noticing when they're having mental health issues. So what can be done is providing screenings for dads. Now, the EPDS is the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale. They actually validated it to be used on men, but what's important to know is that the scoring is different. So this is a different version of it that explains the scoring for men at the bottom. And as you see on the slide, if the person taking it scores between 5 to 8, there's a possible anxiety. 9 to 10 or more is possible depression. Whereas scoring for women on the EPDS, it says 10 or more is a possible depression. And the same for both is that any number other than 0 on question number 10 needs immediate medical attention. And that's the question on suicide. And I also want to say, please note that the EPDS is a screening tool, should not take the place of clinical judgment. Comprehensive clinical assessment by a qualified licensed mental health professional should confirm findings. And whenever I'm talking about this with dads or moms, I really try to stress with them that this is just a screening. It just suggests that you have a increased possibility or a higher likelihood of having anxiety or depression, and that it takes that qualified medical professional doing an evaluation to actually diagnose. So there are treatment options for dad if he were to have a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. Cognitive behavioral therapy is still the one that seems to be up top and have the most effect. There's also cognitive behavioral therapy in groups. There is a computerized CBT program, but they found that the medication was more effective for chronic depression, and the gender differences for CBT is underexplored. So the studies that have mentioned it showed no significant differences. There's also group therapy, psychotherapy, pharmacotherapy. Now, with regards to group therapy or support groups, it's also an environment that dads typically do not attend or are comfortable going to unless it can be just men. So if you have the capacity or the resources to provide some type of support for just the dads, you may have a better likelihood of them attending rather than a mixed group. So dads with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders also impact the development of their child during the perinatal period. So in one study, they found that children whose fathers displayed more withdrawn and depressive behaviors in the father-infant interactions at 3 months scored lower on the Bayley Mental Developmental Index at 24 months. At 24 months, children whose fathers were more engaged and sensitive, as well as those whose fathers were less controlling in their interactions, scored higher on the MDI. And likewise, or conversely, infants have a significant impact on their father's development. So in Abraham et al. 2014, they identified a common neural basis of maternal and paternal care. They charted the brain hormone behavior pathways that support parenthood, and they were able to specify mechanisms of brain malleability as a result of caregiving experiences in human fathers. Which is to say that when these fathers were caring for their infants, when they were the primary caregiver, that their brains actually changed. The parts of their brains that were being stimulated were as if, or the same as primary caregiving mothers. So it's a little complicated to explain here, but I encourage you to look it up. It's fascinating study. Also, to keep in mind that neuroplasticity in the first 4 months postnatally, the researchers found changes in gray matter, both increases and decreases in specific areas of the brain that showed distinct patterns of associations among neural changes, postpartum mood symptoms, and parenting behaviors among fathers. So these changes in the father's brain also have implications for the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and their parenting behaviors. So protective factors in the father-child activation relationship, the fathers were a mediating factor of maternal parenting stress. The father activation had positive correlation, maternal stress had a negative correlation. So what that study showed was that the more that fathers were had that stronger connection with their baby, a more active relationship, that it actually was a protective factor or a mediating factor to the level of stress that the mother had. So if a father had less activation with the baby and mom's stress was higher, it had more negative effects on the baby. So dads having a really strong connection and relationship with their baby actually is a protective factor for the baby. And then in another study, they state the comparison of mother-child and father-child interactions suggests that fathers play a particularly important role in the development of children's openness to the world. Men seem to have a tendency to excite, surprise, and momentarily destabilize children. They also tend to encourage children to take risks, while at the same time ensuring that the latter's safety and security, thus permitting children to learn to be braver in unfamiliar situations, as well as to stand up for themselves. So, not to belabor this point, but there are negative outcomes from that poor father-child relationship. And in one article, they state fathers with postpartum depression symptoms experience reduced paternal-infant attachment, which also acted as mediators between postpartum depression fathers and adverse infants' social development. So that includes poor psychological health, increased mental health disorders, externalizing and internalizing behavioral problems, substance misuse, addiction, criminality or delinquency, economic disadvantage, decreased capacity for empathy, poor peer relationships. And just to be clear, that list is what the child will experience as they grow older and move into adulthood, that they will have these negative outcomes carried with them for their life. So you may be asking, okay, well, what do we do? I thought this quote really summed it up the best. So it's men's paternal postnatal depression or perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is best tackled by the adoption of father-inclusive and father-specific models of care that creatively encourage help-seeking behavior in a notoriously hard-to-engage population, offer flexible delivery options that do not overburden already distressed men, and provide a safe and informal environment for male-only groups to share experiences and concerns. Such interventions can address any cognitive distortions around the male identity and parenting role expectations, and can foster support networks for new fathers who may feel isolated and marginalized. And that was from O'Brien et al. 2017. So just to summarize that, one is the adoption of father-inclusive and father-specific models of care that creatively encourage help-seeking behavior in a notoriously hard-to-engage population. Two, offer flexible delivery options that do not overburden already distressed men. And three, provide a safe and informal environment for male-only groups to share experiences and concerns, all of which should A, address any cognitive distortions around the male identity and parenting role expectations, and B, can foster support networks for new fathers who may feel isolated and marginalized. So as we're nearing the end of the talk, I wanted to share some of my thoughts on this topic. So research is informative and helpful, but it's also restrictive. We need to integrate the clinical perspective as well. So not just what the statistics show us, but what's happening with the individual. And when considering the clinical contribution, look for patterns and frequencies over large groups while remaining receptive to individual experiences. This can help to minimize unnecessary assumptions. So yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that. If you're a provider or a professional, choose your words carefully. Some words have negative connotations for men, like support, support groups, feelings, what are you feeling, instead of saying, how are you doing? So I think it's important also that we normalize perinatal mood and anxiety disorders as part of perinatal discussions frequently. And I believe it should be talked at every prenatal, postnatal parenting class that should be discussing it. And if we talk about it more and more, then hopefully parents will be talking about it, not only with each other, but with other parents. So then it becomes just a normal part of everyday conversation that this is just what happens in this arena, in this sphere. So if it's a couple, encourage them to establish regular discussions about each other's mental health. One of the things that I suggest they do is establish an emergency contact that they both feel comfortable if they needed someone to watch the baby, that they could call this person or these people to take the baby at a moment's notice, and they knew the baby would be taken care of. Now, that could be to avoid never shake a baby. It could be maybe dad's at work and mom is so sleep deprived that she can barely function. She just needs to sleep some. It could be if maybe mom or dad are at home and they're just really frustrated and stressed out and they're afraid that they might hurt the baby and they need to take a break. Or maybe, God forbid, one of the parents is in an accident and ends up at the hospital and they should not be taking the baby with them to the emergency room. So I really encourage them to have that emergency contact in place. I also suggest that they write up a help list for when family and friends ask, what can we do to help? The family can just point to the list and say, here's a list of things that we could really use help with, and pick as many as you want or whichever one you want. That way, the help that they're getting is the help that they actually need, not necessarily what people are willing to offer. So it's a little bit more directed. And I also encourage new dads to talk with each other. It may not be their partner or themselves, but they may recognize signs in a friend or family. And I'll say a little bit more about that. So I can see sometimes when I'm talking about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders with dads that some of them are kind of staring off like, yeah, this is not me. It's not going to happen. I know this is, my wife and I are fine. But what I try to do is expand it to say, what if it's your brother, or what if it's your coworker, or your neighbor, somebody else that you know, and you start recognizing that something's not right. They just are, they're not themselves, they're acting strange, I've never seen this behavior before. With this knowledge, just a little bit of knowledge, this dad can then help to have a conversation or provide those community resources to this person and get them the help before something bad happens. And then lastly, I feel it's important that both parents get screened monthly for 12 months. And I suggest that they plan to do it on the day of the month that their baby is born, because it'll be a natural reminder for them. They're going to celebrate baby's 1-month birthday, 2-month birthday, 3-month birthday. And I also strongly encourage the dads to make it an event each month that it's just him and his partner, him and his wife, and that they do something special together. So it's not just sitting down to do this screening, but it's about them spending time together and doing the screening. So maybe it's dinner at a nice restaurant, or maybe it's a walk on the beach, or it's a hike in the woods, or a picnic in the park. Whatever it is, that the father take the initiative to really focus on their mental health and their relationship. And if they could do it at least once a month and include this screening, if something were to be bubbling up, that they would be able to catch it soon enough and get the help so that nothing bad happens. So as I'm finishing up here, I wanted to just go back to the assumptions activity that we had at the beginning. And I'm wondering if you look back at some of the answers you gave for those first 4 questions, I'm wondering, did any of your assumptions change now that we've been through this material? Can you identify why they've changed? And did you have a light bulb moment that you can use moving forward? So, like the nurses from Sweden, you know, was there one thing that really stood out for you that you were like, oh, you know what, I can do that. It's one thing that I can do differently with dads that would support their mental health or their inclusion or the fostering of the father-baby relationship. And if you can't think of something right now, can you start with this closed-ended question? Hey, Dad, how are you doing? And I also recommend you really try not to ask, are you doing okay? Because to avoid the yes or no questions, when you ask the open-ended question, it invites them to use actual words, not just yes or no, which ends the conversation. So keep that in mind. Ask these new dads, hey, how are you doing? So I wanted to just point out that there are resources for dads. Perinatal Support of Washington is one of my favorites. I talk about it every single prenatal class that I teach, and I give them the contacts to that. There's also a great website, Postpartum Men, which is where I got the screening for dads. Postpartum Support International also has a monthly chat with an expert. Dr. Dan Singley, a psychologist from San Diego, does that once a month for dads to call in. And I've listened in and it was fantastic, really, really good. There's also the Fatherhood Project. And then Mark Williams is actually a dad in the UK who started a campaign, and he's actually gotten members of parliament to join in and help. They've passed laws. They've recently made some changes in their National Health Service to provide screenings for dads on a more regular basis. And they're really pushing forward with a lot of progressive changes. And I'm gonna hand this over back to Mia for her to talk about the warm line and the resources.
So actually, this is Victoria from Perinatal Support Washington. And I just wanted to briefly touch on some of the resources we have for dads. We have a warm line, and on our warm line, we have some dads that are on call. So if somebody calls our warm line wanting to speak with a dad, we can connect that person. So if you have somebody who's calling, who wants to call the warm line and speak to a dad, just let them know to leave a message that they would love a call back from a dad. And then we have a referral guide, which is pictured here. So these are resources and referrals for dad in the Puget Sound, and then also some national resources. And that is on our website. It's under the provider tab, and you would click on materials to order or download. But we also have the link here, and we can send you the slides if you want. You can just email us at info@perinatalsupport.org. And yeah, so those are our resources for dads. Also under that tab, with materials to download, we also have a wellness plan, and that is something that could be helpful for both parents to go over and kind of talk about what things that they could do to give themselves some support and where areas might be lacking.
Great, thank you, Victoria. So I just want to thank you all for attending. Hopefully this was useful and helpful to you. And please don't forget to ask dads, how are they doing? Thank you.